The air in the grand ballroom of the Vance estate was thick with the scent of money and lilies, a cloying combination of old wealth and fresh pretense. From her position near the French doors, Elena Vance watched the reflection of the party in the flawless glass. She saw the glittering chandeliers, the murmuring guests in their tailored suits and silk gowns. But most of all, she saw her husband, Jaden, enter the room with a woman who was not his wife. The woman, Ivana, clung to his arm like a jewel-encrusted leech, her laughter sharp and triumphant. And in that moment, Elena knew the carefully constructed piece of her life was about to be shattered. This wasn't just another party. It was a battlefield, and she had just seen the enemy raise their flag. The Vance family wasn't merely wealthy. They were a dynasty, their name etched into the cornerstones of banks, universities, and art museums across the country. Their ancestral home, a sprawling stone mansion in the heart of Greenwich, Connecticut, was more than a residence. It was a monument to their legacy. With its manicured gardens that rolled down to the Long Island Sound, its oak-paneled library holding first edition classics, and its ballroom that had hosted presidents, the estate was a kingdom. And for the past decade, Elena Vance had been its quiet, unassuming queen. She hadn't been born into this world. Her background was one of modest comfort, her parents being a professor and a librarian. She met Jaden Vance in college, a whirlwind romance where she was swept away by his charm and the intoxicating allure of his world. She was intelligent, poised, and possessed a quiet grace that the family patriarch, Arthur Vance, found refreshing compared to the grasping socialites his son usually dated. He had given his blessing, and Elena had dutifully stepped into her role. She managed the estate with a quiet efficiency that was often mistaken for subservience. She knew the name of every staff member, the favorite flower of every visiting dignitary, and the precise temperature Arthur liked his evening tea. She was the silent engine that kept the Vance empire running smoothly on the domestic front, while Jaden handled the public-facing aspects of Vance Industries, making deals and speeches. Elena ensured the home he returned to was a sanctuary of perfect order. But over the years, the gilded cage had begun to feel more like a prison. Jaden's initial affection had cooled into a polite, dismissive indifference. He saw her not as a partner, but as a high-class household manager. He took her loyalty for granted, her grace for weakness. Their conversations became transactional, revolving around schedules, events, and the needs of his father. The shared laughter and late-night whispers of their youth were distant, faded echoes in the cavernous hallways of the mansion. Her one true ally in the house was Arthur Vance. The patriarch, now in his mid-70s, and battling a degenerative illness that had confined him to a wheelchair, was a man of few words but sharp perception. He had built his empire from the ground up, and he possessed an unnerving ability to see through facades. He saw the way Jaden's eyes would skate past Elena when he spoke to her. He saw the weary sadness that sometimes settled in her expression when she thought no one was looking. Arthur and Elena had forged a deep, unspoken bond. She would spend hours in the library with him, reading aloud from his favorite history books, or simply sitting in comfortable silence as he worked on his memoirs. She tended to his needs not out of duty, but genuine affection and respect. She saw the brilliant, formidable man beneath the frail exterior, and he, in turn, saw the steel spine beneath her gentle demeanor. "You have more of the Vance spirit in you than he does," Arthur had rasped one afternoon, his voice thin but clear, gesturing vaguely in the direction of Jaden's office. "Blood isn't everything, Elena. Character is." The words had been a balm to her wounded soul, but they hadn't changed the reality of her marriage. 2 years ago, Ivana Ricci had entered their lives. She was a marketing executive at a company Vance Industries had acquired. Ambitious, beautiful, in a sharp, predatory way, and utterly shameless. The affair started as whispers, then became an open secret. Soon Jayden stopped trying to hide it altogether. He began bringing Ivana to corporate events, then to casual family dinners. Each appearance was a fresh humiliation for Elena. She endured the pitying glances of friends and the smug, triumphant smirks from Ivana, who took every opportunity to mark her territory. Ivana would casually mention a trip she and Jayden had taken, a private joke they shared, or an intimate detail of his life that a wife should know. But Eleanor didn't. She was a constant, public reminder of Eleanor's displacement. Yet, for Arthur's sake, Eleanor held her head high, refusing to give Ivana the satisfaction of a public scene. She absorbed the pain, the disrespect, the slow-motion demolition of her marriage, and carried on. Her endurance was a quiet act of defiance, a promise to herself that she would not be broken. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that a breaking point was coming for them all. The annual Vance Foundation Gala was the social event of the season in Greenwich. It was a night of performative charity where the elite gathered to write checks, sip vintage champagne, and affirm their place at the top of the societal food chain. But this year, the gala held a deeper significance. It was a dual celebration, marking the Foundation's 30th anniversary, and more importantly, Arthur Vance's 75th birthday. Eleanor had overseen every detail with meticulous care. From the string quartet playing softly in the foyer, to the towering floral arrangements of white orchids and hydrangeas, everything was a testament to understated elegance, a reflection of Arthur's own tastes. She wore a classic navy blue gown by a timeless designer, her only jewelry, the sapphire earrings that had been a gift from Arthur years ago. She moved through the arriving guests with effortless grace, a warm smile for everyone, her voice a low, calming murmur in the rising tide of chatter. She was the consummate hostess, the very picture of Vance dignity. The party was in full swing when Jayden finally made his entrance. He wasn't alone. On his arm was Ivana Ricci, draped in a garish, blood-red dress that was cut dangerously low at the front and audaciously high at the back. It was a dress designed to be noticed, to scream for attention in a room that whispered. Her diamonds were larger, her makeup heavier, her laughter louder than anyone else's. She was a splash of cheap paint on an old master's canvas. A hush rippled through the ballroom as they entered. Conversations stuttered. Eyes darted from Eleanor to Jayden and Ivana, then quickly away. It was one thing to parade a mistress at a restaurant or a nightclub. It was another thing entirely to bring her to the patriarch's birthday celebration, into the very heart of the family home. It was a declaration of war. Jayden, to his credit, looked momentarily uncomfortable. He had the decency to avoid his wife's gaze, his eyes fixed on some point over her shoulder. But Ivana's smile was pure, venomous triumph. She scanned the room as if she were its new queen, her eyes finally landing on Eleanor. She tightened her grip on Jayden's arm, a possessive gesture for all to see. Eleanor felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, waiting for her to crumble, to scream, to make a scene. She felt the blood drain from her face, but her training, her years of practiced composure, took over. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and held her ground. She would not allow this woman to destroy a night dedicated to Arthur. She saw her brother-in-law, Robert, and his wife, Clara, shoot her a look of sympathetic horror. Clara started to move toward her, but Elena gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Not now. Don't make it worse." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of her own making. She watched as Jaden led Ivana toward the central bar, bypassing his father, who was seated in a grand wingback chair near the fireplace, observing the room with hooded, discerning eyes. Arthur's expression was unreadable, but Eleanor knew him well enough to see the flicker of profound disappointment, the tightening of his jaw. He had seen the entrance, and he had seen his son's cowardice. The night wore on, each minute an exercise in excruciating self-control for Eleanor. She continued her duties, speaking with donors, directing staff, and ensuring Arthur was comfortable, all while acutely aware of Ivana's presence. The woman was a gravitational force of disruption, pulling Jaden into her orbit and leaving a wake of awkward silence wherever she went. She flitted from group to group, introducing herself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, her voice carrying across the room as she regaled people with stories that invariably featured Jules. Elena felt herself dissociating, watching the scene as if it were a play. There was the dutiful wife, the cheating husband, the vulgar mistress, the watching patriarch. The script felt old, tired, and deeply humiliating. She had played her part with quiet dignity for 2 long years, but tonight the stage lights felt unbearably hot, the audience's gaze unbearably heavy. Something had to give. The foundation of her carefully managed world was cracking, and she could hear the rumble of its imminent collapse. The moment of ignition came, as it often does, from a trivial incident. Elena was standing near Arthur's chair, quietly asking if he needed anything, when one of the younger catering staff, a nervous boy named Leo, accidentally jostled a passing guest while carrying a tray of champagne flutes. One of the glasses tipped, splashing a few drops of champagne onto the sleeve of Ivana's crimson dress. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mum," Leo stammered, his face flushing with mortification as he fumbled for a napkin. Ivana recoiled as if she'd been struck. "Watch where you're going, you clumsy oaf," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through the ambient music and conversation. Several nearby guests turned to look. Elena stepped forward instinctively, her hostess instincts kicking in. "It's all right, Leo," she said softly, placing a calming hand on the young man's arm before turning to Ivana. "It was just a small accident. I'm sure it will dry without a stain." Her tone was polite, neutral, meant to de-escalate. But Ivana wasn't interested in de-escalation. She had been looking for a stage, a moment to assert her dominance over Elena, and this was it. She looked Elena up and down with a contemptuous sneer, taking in the simple, elegant dress and the quiet authority with which she had spoken. "You would know all about cleaning up messes, wouldn't you?" Ivana said, her voice dripping with condescension. She turned to Jaden, who had just walked over to see what the commotion was about. She looped her arm through his, pressing herself against him. "Honestly, Jaden," she said loudly, ensuring everyone within a 20-foot radius could hear, "why do you even keep her around? The paid staff is more useful. Tell your little servant to fetch me another glass of champagne, and this time, make sure she doesn't spill it." The word hung in the air, ugly and obscene, servant. The entire ballroom seemed to fall silent at once. The string quartet faltered, a violin screeching into the sudden quiet before ceasing altogether. Every head turned. Every eye was fixed on the tableau by the fireplace. The humiliated wife, the triumphant mistress, the weak husband, and the silent patriarch. Elena felt the word like a physical blow. It was the culmination of every silent insult, every stolen weekend, every pitying glance she had endured for 2 years. All her pain, her rage, her suffocating sense of injustice coalesced into a single, blinding point of white-hot fury. For a split second, she saw herself lunging forward, felt the imagined satisfaction of slapping the smug smirk off Ivana's face. But she didn't. Instead, a strange and terrible calm settled over her. Her breathing evened. Her hands, which had clenched into fists at her sides, slowly relaxed. She met Ivana's cruel, glittering eyes with a gaze as cold and clear as ice. She didn't need to scream. Her silence was a weapon in itself. Jaden looked utterly lost. He glanced from Ivana's hard, expectant face to Elena's chillingly serene one. He opened his mouth, then closed it, a fish gasping for air. He did nothing. He said nothing. His inaction was a confession, a verdict, a final, unforgivable betrayal. He was not her husband. He was merely the man she was married to. Ivana's smirk widened. She thought she had won. She had publicly debased her rival, stamping her with the ultimate insult in this world of class and status, and Jaden hadn't defended her. In her mind, the battle was over. But she had made a fatal miscalculation. She had played her scene for the wrong audience. She thought the most powerful person in the room was Jaden, the heir apparent. She had forgotten about the king. From the wingback chair, Arthur Vance began to move. A collective gasp went through the room as Arthur Vance, with a strength that seemed to defy his frail condition, pushed himself up from his chair. He waved away the concerned butler who rushed to his side, his eyes, burning with a cold fire, fixed on the scene before him. The only sound in the dead silent ballroom was the soft thud of his cane against the marble floor as he took 2 deliberate, unsteady steps forward. All the power, all the authority in the room, which had momentarily shifted to Ivana, now recoiled and centered on him. He ignored Elena and his son. His gaze fell directly and with crushing weight upon Ivana Ricci. "Miss Ricci," he began, his voice not loud, but carrying to every corner of the room with the force of a judge passing sentence. "For 2 years I have tolerated your presence at the fringes of my family. I have watched you operate. I believed my son's infatuation was a temporary lapse in an otherwise sound judgment. It appears I was mistaken on all counts." Ivana's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "Mr. Vance, He raised a single, trembling hand, and she fell silent. "You come into my home, a home built on 3 generations of integrity and hard work," he continued, his voice laced with contempt. "You wear a dress paid for with my family's money, you drink my family's champagne, and you stand on my family's floors. And from this position of profound privilege, a privilege you have done nothing to earn, you dare to insult the one person in this room who has shown more character, more grace, and more dignity than you could possibly comprehend." He took another step, closer now. His eyes raked over her, from her expensive shoes to her perfectly coiffed hair. "You mistake wealth for class. You mistake arrogance for strength. You see this house, this family, as a prize to be won, a corporation to be taken over. You are a parasite, Miss Ricci, and you have just revealed the depths of your own vulgarity to everyone." Ivana's face, once a mask of triumph, had paled to a sickly white. She looked to Jaden for support, but he stood frozen, his face a mask of horror, as he watched his father systematically dismantle his mistress. Arthur then turned his piercing gaze upon his son. The disappointment in his eyes was a tangible thing, a force that made Jaden physically recoil. "And you," Arthur said, his voice now filled with a deep, sorrowful anger. "My son, I have watched you become a stranger. You have a wife of impeccable character, a woman who has stood by you, supported you, and cared for your father in his dotage with a tenderness you have never once shown. A woman who has borne your public humiliations with a stoicism that should have shamed you into being a better man." He gestured with his cane toward Eleanor, who stood still as a statue, tears silently tracking down her cheeks. "Look at her, Jaden. Look at the woman you have thrown away for this." The disgust in his voice, as he glanced at Ivana, was absolute. "You have not only broken your vows to her," Arthur declared, his voice rising in strength. "You have broken my trust. You have dishonored our name. You believe that because you carry the Vance name, you are entitled to the Vance fortune, to this house, to this legacy. You have never understood. The name is not a privilege, it is a responsibility. A responsibility you have spectacularly failed to uphold. The public dressing down was brutal, surgical, and complete." Jaden's face was ashen. He was no longer the powerful heir to Vance Industries. He was a child being scolded by his father in front of all his peers. The power dynamic of his entire life had just been irrevocably shattered. Arthur took a deep, shuddering breath, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked weary, but his eyes were clear and resolute. He had made his judgment. Now it was time for the sentencing. "Mr. Davies," he called out, his voice ringing with authority. "If you would, please." A portly, silver-haired man in a conservative suit, the family's long-time lawyer, stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, carrying a leather portfolio. The final act was about to begin. Walter Davies, the Vance family's attorney for over 40 years, navigated through the parted sea of stunned guests. His face was a professional mask of neutrality, but his eyes held a glint of what could only be described as grim satisfaction. He approached Arthur Vance and handed him the rich, mahogany-colored leather portfolio. Arthur took it with a steady hand. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he scanned the room, his gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of his friends, business partners, and family members. He was not just a father reprimanding his son. He was a king holding court, ensuring his decree was witnessed by all. "This house," he began, his voice resonating with a quiet power that commanded absolute attention, "is more than brick and mortar. It is the heart of our family. My grandfather laid the foundation stone with his own hands. My father filled these rooms with art and music. I filled them with my own children, hoping they would understand what this place represents. Stability, honor, and legacy. It is a testament that what we build should outlast us." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. His eyes found Jaden's again, and they were filled not with anger now, but with a profound, cutting finality. "A legacy is not passed on through blood alone," Arthur said, his voice clear and unwavering. "It must be earned. It must be respected. It must be nurtured. You, Jaden, have treated this home like a hotel and its mistress like a concierge. You do not understand its value, and therefore you are no longer worthy of its stewardship." Then he turned to Elena. The hardness in his expression softened, replaced by a look of deep, paternal affection and profound respect. He beckoned her closer with a gentle nod. Elena moved as if in a dream, stepping forward until she stood directly before him. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze, overwhelmed by the sudden, fierce defense of her honor. "Elena," Arthur said, his voice now gentle, "please look at me." She slowly lifted her head. His eyes were kind, and in their depths she saw a validation that she had been starved of for years. "For 10 years, he said, speaking to her but ensuring everyone could hear. "You have been the true keeper of this family's soul. You have tended to this house not as a manager, but as a guardian. You have cared for an old man with patience and love. You have endured betrayal with a strength I can only admire. You have shown loyalty, grace, and resilience in the face of profound disrespect. You, my dear, understand what it means to be a Vance far better than my own son ever has." He opened the leather portfolio. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark blue satin, was a thick document bound with a ribbon. He carefully lifted it out. "The laws of man say that what is mine I can pass to my son," Arthur declared, "but the laws of decency and justice demand that what is earned should be given to the worthy." He held the document out to her. "This," he announced, his voice ringing with triumph, "is the deed to the Vance estate. Every square foot of this land, every stone of this mansion, every piece of furniture and art within its walls. I have spent the last 6 months working with Mr. Davies to transfer sole, unassailable ownership. It is all legally and irrevocably in your name, effective immediately." He placed the deed into Elena's trembling hands. "This house," Arthur Vance proclaimed, his voice booming through the stunned silence, "belongs to its true mistress." Elena stared down at the document. Her name, Elena Morgan Vance, was written in bold, clear type. It was real. The weight of the paper in her hands was the weight of freedom, of justice, of a future she had never dared to imagine. The gilded cage was hers, and she now held the key. For a long moment, the only sound was the collective, indrawn breath of over 100 people. Then, the silence was shattered. "No!" Ivana shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound. "That's impossible. It's his birthright. Jaden, do something!" Jaden was chalk white, his mouth agape. He looked from the deed in Eleanor's hands to his father's resolute face, his mind struggling to process the cataclysmic shift that had just occurred. The mansion, the centerpiece of his inheritance, the symbol of his identity, was gone, given to the wife he had disregarded. "Father, you can't," he stammered, his voice weak and pleading. "This is our home." "It was our home," Arthur corrected him coldly. "It is now Elena's home. You are a guest here, as is your companion." Elena finally looked up from the deed. The shock was receding, replaced by a wave of empowerment so potent it was dizzying. The tears on her face had dried, and her eyes, when they met Ivana's, were no longer soft and forgiving. They were chips of sapphire, hard and brilliant. She took a step toward Ivana, who was still clinging to Jaden's arm like a drowning woman. "I believe," Elena said, her voice perfectly calm and level, cutting through Ivana's rising hysteria. "The party is over." She held up the deed slightly. "As the owner of this house, I must ask you to leave." She paused for effect. "Now." Ivana stared at her, her face a contorted mask of disbelief and rage. "You can't do this! Jaden!" But Jaden was a broken man. He was looking at Elena as if seeing her for the first time, not as a fixture of his home, but as a woman who held all the power. Elena's gaze shifted to him. The years of pain, of quiet suffering were in her eyes, but so was an unyielding finality. "You too, Jaden," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You have dishonored me in my home for the last time. Pack your things. I'll have the staff bring your bags to the gatehouse. You have 1 hour. "Elena, please," he begged, taking a step toward her. "We can talk about this." "There is nothing left to talk about," she replied, turning her back on him, a gesture of dismissal more absolute than any argument. "Head of security, please escort Miss Ricci and Mr. Vance from the premises." 2 burly men in discreet dark suits materialized, moving with quiet efficiency. One placed a firm hand on Ivana's arm. She tried to wrench away, her voice rising to a shrill cry. "Get your hands off me! Jaden, don't let them do this!" But Jaden didn't move. He simply stared at the life he had just lost. The security guard firmly guided the sputtering, furious Ivana toward the main entrance. The other guard stood patiently by Jaden. "Sir." Defeated, Jaden turned and began the long, humiliating walk out of his own home, followed by the guard. The guests parted for them, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and a certain grim satisfaction. The drama was over, and a new order had been established. As the great oak doors closed behind them, a smattering of applause broke out, started by Jaden's aunt, a formidable woman who had always despised Ivana. Soon the entire room was applauding. They weren't just clapping for the drama, they were applauding for Elena. They were acknowledging the quiet strength she had displayed for years, and the poetic justice they had just witnessed. Elena stood tall, the deed held firmly in her hand. She gave a small, grateful nod to Arthur, who looked exhausted, but profoundly content. He had secured his legacy by placing it in the most capable hands. He had not lost a son. He had crowned a queen. Elena turned to her guests, a slow, genuine smile finally reaching her lips. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I have some household matters to attend to." The days following the gala were a whirlwind of decisive action. The story of what happened at Arthur Vance's 75th birthday party spread through their social circles like wildfire, becoming an instant legend. The narrative was clear. The quiet, dignified wife had finally vanquished the vulgar mistress and the feckless husband, backed by the unshakable judgment of the patriarch. Elena was no longer seen with pity, but with a newfound awe and respect. Her first priority was Arthur. She moved his suite of rooms to the sunniest wing of the mansion, overlooking the rose gardens he loved. She hired the best private nursing care to supplement her own, ensuring he was never without comfort or company. His health seemed to rally with the resolution of his family crisis. A great weight had been lifted from his shoulders, and he spent his days peacefully dictating his memoirs to a stenographer, with Eleanor by his side. Her second act was to file for divorce. Jaden, humbled and desperate, tried to contest it, tried to see her, sending endless texts and leaving tearful voicemails. He pleaded for a second chance, promising he would end it with Ivana, that he had made a terrible mistake. Elena instructed her lawyer, a shark recommended by Mr. Davies, to ignore it all. The trust was broken beyond repair. The settlement was swift and brutal. Jaden was left with the trust fund his grandfather had established for him, enough to live comfortably, but not opulently. He was cut off from Vance Industries, with Arthur signing over his controlling shares to a professional board, with a significant portion held in trust for future charitable works in Eleanor's name. Jaden had lost his home, his inheritance, his wife, and his father's respect in a single night. Ivana Ricci vanished. Once it was clear that Jaden was no longer the golden goose, her phone calls and texts to him ceased. She was scrubbed from Vance Industries' corporate roster and disappeared from the Greenwich social scene as quickly as she had arrived, a footnote in the Vance family saga. Elena, meanwhile, was undergoing a profound transformation. With the weight of her unhappy marriage lifted, she bloomed. She started taking a more active role in the Vance Foundation, shifting its focus to causes she was passionate about: education for underprivileged women and arts programs for children. She proved to have a keen business sense, much like Arthur, and the foundation's endowment grew under her leadership. She didn't rattle around the vast mansion, lonely and lost. Instead, she filled it with life. She hosted fundraisers, chamber music concerts, and salons for artists and thinkers. She invited her own family, the professor and the librarian, to stay for long stretches, their quiet, intellectual warmth filling the halls that had once echoed with tension. The house, once a symbol of her confinement, was now the seat of her power and her platform for doing good. It was no longer a gilded cage, but a vibrant, thriving queendom. Months later, on a warm spring evening, Elena stood on the main balcony, the same one from which she had often watched Jaden leave for his trysts. She held a glass of wine, looking out over the sprawling lawns that sloped down to the shimmering waters of the Sound. The air was filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the distant sound of an orchestra tuning up for a charity event she was hosting. She was no longer Elena, the quiet wife of Jaden Vance. She was Elena Vance, the matriarch of the Vance estate, a philanthropist, a leader. She had not inherited her position. She had earned it through silent strength and unwavering character. She had been called a servant in her own home, and in response, fate and a wise old man had handed her the entire kingdom. And as she looked out at her domain, she smiled. She was finally, truly, home. A year passed. The seasons turned, painting the grounds of the Vance estate in the vibrant greens of summer, the fiery hues of autumn, and the stark, elegant white of winter. Under Elena's stewardship, the mansion was more alive than ever. It was no longer a silent museum of inherited wealth, but a hub of purpose and culture. The Elena Vance Foundation for Women in the Arts had become a resounding success. Its annual gala, an event celebrated not for its exclusivity, but for its genuine impact. Elena had found her voice, her purpose, and a deep, quiet contentment that had long eluded her. Arthur, though physically weaker, remained mentally sharp. His days were spent in the sun-drenched library, Elena often reading to him, their bond the steady, unwavering core of the new household. He watched her command her new life with a profound, paternal pride. He had made the right choice. He had secured his legacy by betting on character over bloodline, and his wager had paid off handsomely. The ghosts of Jaden and Ivana had seemingly faded. After the divorce was finalized, Jaden had reportedly moved to California, licking his wounds and living a quieter life on his now significantly reduced trust fund. Ivana had vanished from the society pages entirely. For the first time in a decade, Elena felt a sense of peace, a belief that the past was finally behind her. But the past is never truly gone. It is merely waiting for an opportunity to reassert itself. The opportunity arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning in October, delivered by a courier. It was a thick, formal envelope, bearing the letterhead of a prestigious New York City law firm she didn't recognize. Inside, nestled amongst pages of dense legalese, was a petition filed in the Superior Court of Connecticut. The petitioner was Jaden Vance. The respondent was Eleanor Vance. And the claim was that the transfer of the Vance estate was null and void. Jaden was suing her. He wasn't just demanding a portion of the asset, he was demanding all of it. The grounds were as insidious as they were cruel. He claimed that at the time of the signing, his father, Arthur Vance, was suffering from diminished mental capacity and was the victim of undue influence from his then daughter-in-law. The petition painted a vile picture. It portrayed Elena not as a devoted caretaker, but as a cunning and manipulative gold digger who had taken advantage of a sick, vulnerable old man. It twisted her every kindness into a calculated act of avarice. It claimed she had systematically isolated Arthur from his own son, poisoning his mind against his rightful heir to seize the family's greatest treasure for herself. Elena read the words, and the calm, ordered world she had built began to tremble. The fury that rose in her was cold and sharp. This wasn't the desperate pleading of the broken man who had been escorted from his home. This was a calculated, venomous assault designed to destroy not just her ownership of the house, but her reputation, her character, and the very foundation of her new life. He was trying to rewrite history, casting himself as the victim and her as the villain. Her first call was to Walter Davies. The old lawyer's voice was grim. "I was afraid this might happen, Elena," he said. "A cornered animal is a dangerous one. Jayden has nothing left to lose, and a world to gain. His lawyers are sharks. This will be ugly." The ugliness began almost immediately. The news of the lawsuit leaked to the press, and suddenly, the narrative that had once favored her began to splinter. Tabloid articles appeared with speculative headlines. "Vance family war. Did caretaker wife swindle ailing patriarch?" Old photos of her and Jayden in happier times were dredged up, juxtaposed with photos of her now, looking poised and powerful at Foundation events. The insinuation was clear. Worse still was the reaction from within the family. Jayden's brother, Robert, and his wife, Clara, who had applauded her victory at the gala, now arrived at the mansion, with faces etched in worry. "Elena, we know this is absurd," Robert began, shifting uncomfortably in the formal sitting room. "We were there. We saw what happened. But a public court battle, the things Jayden is alleging, it will drag the family name through the mud." "He's dragging my name through the mud," Elena corrected him, her voice steely. "He is accusing me of being a common thief." "Of course, and it's despicable," Clara added quickly, her tone placating. "But his lawyers will subpoena Arthur's medical records. They will force him to testify, to be evaluated by their doctors. Think of the stress on him in his condition. Is there no other way? A settlement, perhaps? Give Jayden a portion of the value, enough to make him go away." Elena stared at them, a wave of profound disappointment washing over her. She had thought they were her allies, but their loyalty was to the family's pristine public image, not to her or even to the truth. They saw her not as the wronged party, but as an obstacle to a quiet, clean resolution. They wanted her to pay off the man who had abused and humiliated her for years, simply to avoid a scandal. "No," Elena said, the word final and absolute. "There will be no settlement. I will not pay my abuser a single dollar for the privilege of being slandered by him. Your father knew exactly what he was doing, and his wishes were perfectly clear. I will not allow Jayden to desecrate his father's legacy and my honor just to avoid some bad press." Robert and Clara exchanged a look of frustration. "Elena, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," she cut in, standing up to signal the end of the conversation. "I am defending the truth. Jayden started this war. I intend to finish it." After they left, the vast house felt silent and imposing once more. The battle she thought she had won a year ago, it turned out, was only the opening salvo. The real war was just beginning, and this time she was fighting not just for a house, but for her very identity. She walked to the library where Arthur was dozing in his wheelchair, a book open on his lap. She watched the gentle rise and fall of his chest and felt a surge of protective resolve. Jayden wanted a fight. He had forgotten who he was dealing with. He remembered the quiet, subservient wife. He was about to be reacquainted with the woman who now owned his world. The legal battle began in earnest, a grueling process of depositions and discovery motions. Jayden's lawyers were relentless. They subpoenaed years of financial records, household staff rosters, and private emails, searching for any scrap of evidence they could twist to fit their narrative. The centerpiece of their strategy was the deposition of Elena herself. They sat across from each other in a sterile, wood-paneled conference room in Hartford. Jayden was there, looking thinner, harder, his eyes filled with a resentful fire. He avoided looking directly at her, instead whispering to his lead attorney, a man with a predatory smile named Marcus Thorne. For 6 hours Thorne questioned Eleanor. He was condescending, invasive, and deeply personal. He brought up her modest upbringing, insinuating she had married Jaden for money. He asked about every large purchase she had ever made, every trip she had taken. He twisted her management of the household into a campaign to control every aspect of Arthur's life. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Vance," Thorne sneered at one point, "that you systematically fired staff loyal to Mr. Jaden Vance and replaced them with people loyal only to you?" "I replaced staff who were incompetent or disrespectful," Elena replied calmly, her hands folded on the table. "My loyalty was to the smooth running of the household and the well-being of my father-in-law, who was the owner of the home." "Your father-in-law, who you admit was seriously ill," Thorne pounced. "So ill, in fact, that he was easily confused, easily led?" "My father-in-law was physically frail, but his mind was, and is, as sharp as a razor's edge," she said, her voice like ice. "A fact you will soon discover." Throughout the ordeal, Eleanor remained unshakable. The woman who once flinched at a harsh word now met every attack with poise and precision. She answered every question with the simple, unvarnished truth. Her composure clearly unnerved Jaden and frustrated his attorney. They had expected her to crumble, to become emotional and contradictory. They had underestimated her completely. After the deposition, Eleanor met with Walter Davies. "They have nothing, Eleanor," the lawyer assured her. "It's all insinuation, but their entire case rests on convincing a judge that Arthur's mind was failing. They will push for a court-ordered competency hearing. It will be a circus." "They won't get the chance," Elena said, a look of quiet determination in her eyes. "Arthur and I prepared for this. Jaden thinks his father is his pawn. He's forgotten that he was always the best player in the game." A week later, Elena instructed Davies to make an offer to the opposing counsel. It was not a settlement, it was an invitation. She invited Jaden, Robert, and their respective lawyers to a private meeting at the Vance estate. The purpose, she stated, was to present new evidence that would render their lawsuit moot. Curiosity and arrogance led them to accept. They arrived the following afternoon, assembling in the Grand Library, the very heart of Arthur's domain. Arthur himself was not present. Elena had insisted he not be subjected to the stress. Jaden walked into the room with a swagger, assuming the invitation was a sign of weakness, a prelude to a settlement offer. Robert and Clara looked merely anxious, hoping to mediate an end to the family's public humiliation. "Thank you all for coming," Elena began, standing before the large mahogany desk. "You have put my character, and more grievously, Arthur's cognitive state, on trial. You have accused me of manipulating a frail old man. Before we proceed with this charade in court, I thought it only fair that you hear from the victim himself," Marcus Thorne scoffed. "If you think putting a sick man on the stand to give a coached statement will help your case." "Oh, he won't be taking the stand," Elena said, gesturing to a large television screen that had been discreetly installed on the wall. "He already has." She pressed a button on a remote control. The screen flickered to life. It showed Arthur Vance, sitting in that very library, in his favorite wingback chair. He looked frail, yes, but his eyes were clear, intelligent, and piercing. He was looking directly into the camera. The date and time stamp in the corner of the screen read 6 p.m. on the evening of the gala, just 2 hours after he had signed the final deed transfer documents with Walter Davies, who was sitting just out of frame. "I am Arthur Vance," he began, his voice raspy but firm. "I am recording this statement of my own free will, in full command of my faculties, to clarify the legal and moral reasoning behind my decision to transfer the title of my home to my daughter-in-law, Elena Morgan Vance." Jaden's face went pale. Robert leaned forward, his expression frozen in shock. "My son, Jaden," Arthur continued, his gaze unwavering, believes this house is his birthright. A birthright is a concept for kings and fools. In the real world, things of value must be earned, or at the very least, respected. Jaden has done neither. Arthur then systematically, and with devastating precision, recounted Jaden's years of neglect, his casual cruelty towards Elena, and his profound lack of character. To bring that woman, Ivana Ricci, into my home on the night of my birthday was not just an insult to his wife. It was a final demonstration of his pathetic weakness. A man who cannot control his own base impulses cannot be trusted to be the steward of a legacy. The camera seemed to zoom in slightly on Arthur's face. Let me be perfectly clear for any court or any person who may question my state of mind. This was not an act of anger. It was an act of clarity. I have watched Elena for 10 years. I have seen her integrity, her strength, her compassion. She has honored the responsibilities that Jaden has shirked. She has shown more Vance character than he ever has. The house is not a reward. It is a recognition of who she is. Then Arthur's gaze seemed to soften, but his words sharpened. And to my other son, Robert, he said, and Robert visibly flinched. You may wonder why I did not pass the estate to you. It is because your defining characteristic has always been the avoidance of conflict. You are a good man, but you are not a strong one. You would have placated Jaden. You would have sold the estate to keep the peace. You would not have fought for it. Eleanor will. The video ended. Arthur Vance, from the past, had delivered the final, unassailable judgment. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by a small, strangled sound from Jaden. He stared at the blank screen, his face ashen. He had been so sure of his father's weakness, so convinced of his own victimhood. In 5 minutes, his father had dismantled his entire case, his entire sense of self, with the cold, hard truth. Elena stood quietly, allowing the weight of Arthur's words to fill the room. There was no triumph on her face, only a sad finality. Marcus Thorne was the first to speak, clearing his throat. This is highly unorthodox, but compelling. He knew, as did everyone in the room, that the video was a silver bullet. No judge would rule against such clear and convincing evidence of Arthur's intent and lucidity. The lawsuit was dead. The next morning, Jaden's lawyers formally withdrew the petition. It was over. Jaden left the estate that day without another word. Robert and Clara approached Elena before they departed, their faces humbled. He was right, Elena, Robert said, his voice heavy with regret. About me. About everything. Forgive us for doubting you. Elena simply nodded. The war was finally, truly over. She had fought for her home, her honor, and for Arthur's legacy. And she had won. Standing alone in the quiet library, she looked out the window at the sprawling gardens. The echoes of the past had faded, replaced by the promise of a future she would build on her own terms, a future built not on birthright, but on character. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a cheating husband or a scorned wife. It's a story about the true nature of value. Ivana and Jaden saw value in money, status, and fleeting passion. But Arthur and Eleanor understood that true worth lies in character, loyalty, and quiet dignity. The Vance mansion wasn't just a prize, it was a symbol, and it was ultimately entrusted to the person who cherished what it stood for. Eleanor's victory wasn't just in getting the house. It was in the powerful affirmation that her quiet strength was worth more than all of Jaden's inherited privilege and all of Ivana's loud ambition. She proved that sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who has patiently earned the right to speak the final word. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who might appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.